What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Whatcast. Before we start, Mike, I got an interesting email from a Mr. David Green, and he was talking about the loud noises heard from the sky when we were talking about that Warminster thing stuff.
Yeah, yep.
And I mentioned my story about hearing that loud sound when I was asleep, and he wrote us a great email and asked if I had ever heard of or give any thought to exploding brain syndrome. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah. Exploding head syndrome.
Yeah. And I've heard of it too.
Where you wake up hearing a huge explosion or bang, and there's no explanation for it.
Right. That's something I've heard of as well, and I never considered it. So thank you, Mr. David, for sending that in. I found that very interesting. All right. So to get to the show, I got a message from our friend Stephanie asking me what episode we covered Mr. Phil Schneider in. And we have a website. It's on our website. It'll link you to our archives. And the archives have a search engine, and it works rather well. If I put in the title fart nugget, or Mike put in the description the word fart nugget, you can go there and search the word fart or nugget, and it will bring up that episode. It works very well.
How many people are going to go look up fart nugget?
Please do. It's not going to bring up anything, so if it would be funny if it did, but it doesn't. But I went there and because I couldn't remember what episode number or what the title of the episode was called, so I went there and I did a search for it to see if I can find it. And funny enough, searching for the words Phil, the word Schneider, the word underground base, and alien war yielded 0 results for linking anything to us covering Phil Schneider.
Wait a second. There's nothing that came up for alien war?
Well, yes, episodes that covered an alien war, like there was...
Okay, I was going to say, if nothing came up for alien war, then either we're not doing our job or something is seriously fucked. Either one could be both could be the case, really, but...
Yeah, but nothing pertaining to Phil Schneider. So I don't find us putting out, and I talked to Mike, and Mike, you agreed, right? We've covered Phil Schneider a few times.
Yeah, in fact, I'm pretty sure we covered the original version of this documentary. Because the documentary we're covering the director's cut of the documentary called Underground. So if you guys remember us covering Underground, please send us messages in email or through the website or social media. Just let us know, because I don't think we're crazy. I'm pretty sure that this was something we did.
Yeah, I know that we've covered Phil Schneider in part with certain episodes. I know that we had to have mentioned him when we did a show on fucking underground bases, right?
It would be weird if we didn't.
Right.
It would be very weird. But that being said, if it was covered in an underground base episode, it's not necessarily true that we would have included him in the description. But I'm pretty sure that we did an episode just on Phil Schneider.
I'm pretty positive. To be completely honest, I had never heard of his story until we started doing the show. So I believe it was fairly early on. So I mean, even from watching this documentary again, I knew everything about it. It was very familiar to me. I knew all the details because we've covered it so well. It was something that we did a while ago back in the day where we had like days to just read about something on hours on end. So I knew it inside and out. So, I mean, I'm sure we did. But since we can't find it or it's under a different title, let's just say that we did a show on Phil Schneider and didn't mention the words Phil Schneider or any of the others that I mentioned before in the description or title. We're going to talk about, like Mike said, the director's cut of the documentary, The Underground, which is basically about Phil Schneider and his story. Maybe asking who's Phil Schneider, some of you may know. Just to keep everybody up to date, Phil Schneider is what we would call today a whistleblower on the U.S. government about an ongoing war here on Earth underground with aliens. And he made his mark with a U.S. tour giving lectures and speeches about his experiences in 1995. So for setting the stage here, Mike, we're going like deep down a rabbit hole. This is the government's working with fucking aliens rabbit hole, right? This is the good stuff.
Oh yeah, this is the best stuff. This is secret underground bases. This is fucking the Philadelphia experiment. This all manner of government fuckery, and according to Phil Schneider, the government has been at war with these alien beings that live underground, but they don't tell certain people in the military that it's going to affect that they are currently at war with them. So it catches everybody by surprise.
What did you think of Phil Schneider when you first heard his story?
So when I first heard his story, I heard the story. This is going back before we did the show. I remember seeing on YouTube some of the clips that are in the documentary are some of the videos I saw on YouTube, but just like the really grainy old, shoulder mounted camcorder quality videos. Those were the first ones I saw. And to me, at first, it just sounded like another one of these guys that was, telling their alien story, like, without really anything to support it. But then he started talking about how he was attacked by aliens, and then shows his wounds, and I'm like, oh shit, he's showing wounds now. Like, that kind of backs up his story. And I mean, sure, he could have these weird fucking scars that maybe came from somewhere else. But at the time when I first heard it, I was inclined to believe him. And then knowing how his story ends, I feel like that gives more support to what he had been saying all along.
Right, definitely. And this director's cut has some new information, at least new to me, stuff that I didn't recognize being so familiar with the story. That's kind of, there's some aspects that shed some light, and then some questions I kind of have for you that kind of thinned out the story for me a little bit. But like Mike said, this is when I first saw the stories and you're talking about his tour. He did this tour in 95, and thankfully they all recorded it. And he was saying some heavy shit. Like I said, this is fighting with alien shit.
And just so you guys know, the director's cut of the documentary is free on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and I liked it, but like Mike said, I just thought it was just some another dude talking crazy shit about aliens and UFOs and government conspiracies. It was more conspiracy latent for me, and I'm not too much into conspiracy stuff, or at least I wasn't back then. But what makes Phil stand out is that he makes these statements and for the most part has physical evidence or proof. And he says that for 17 years he worked on, quote, black budget projects for our government as an engineer, structural engineer with, quote, aerospace applications, and a geologist. And he was hired to build an underground base underneath the existing base at Dulce, Los Alamos laboratory. Now, his lectures, he tells his story of this attack, and he goes into some background stuff, and we'll get into the evidence that he has. But for now, Mike, can you tell us what happened while they were building this underground base, according to Phil Schneider?
Yeah, I sure can. All manner of chaos and insanity. So the way the story goes, Phil Schneider was, as Mateo mentioned, he was working on black projects, but he was specifically called in for his expertise in the field of geology. He was working with military escort digging the initial tunnels for this underground base in Dulce, New Mexico, or outside Dulce, New Mexico. You know, before I get into the story, I just for anyone that's new to the Dulce story, actually that reminds me, maybe we talked about this story during the Dulce base episode.
Right, and that's the one thing that did come out when I looked for Miss Stephanie, and I sent her that one because it's called Dulce.
Yeah, that's probably where we talked about it.
Yeah, the title said Dulce and underground bases, so I mean, we've had to have talked about Phil Schneider in that episode.
Yeah. But the Dulce base has long been something in the alien conspiracy theories, and kind of plays into the whole military abduction experience as well. But this is supposed to be a base that is miles deep with multiple levels, and the top levels are human levels. Then there's lower levels where it's human and alien, and then there's levels beyond that are just for aliens. And that's where you hear stories of people talking about these. And there was even like this alleged leaked video that someone took of these weird pods with humanoid figures floating in them, suspended in some sort of liquid. There's stories about human organ harvesting that goes on there, and hybrid programs. There was an episode of UFO Hunters that was actually taken off the air because of some of the information that they were sharing about the base, and they showed this photograph of like I believe it was a human cow hybrid thing, if I remember correctly. We ended up tracking it down for the last episode, or for that episode we did on the Dulce base. So I don't know if it's still out there or not, but we were able to track it down at that point. But that being said, that was probably a good 6 or 7 years ago when we covered that. So I really can't say one way or the other.
Yeah, I remember going to work after that episode aired, and I wasn't watching UFO Hunters at the time, but my boss did, and he loves all that shit. And I got to work, and he was like wide-eyed. He was like, "Did you watch that shit about a place called Dulce?" I was like, "No." And he said, "Dude, they had a picture of something I don't understand." And he like literally was at a loss for words. He said it was like a cow, but it had a human face, at least like human forward-setting eyes. And
yeah, it was weird, man.
And it was instantly gone. I couldn't find it. I've never seen the episode. When you buy, I even heard that if you buy the DVD set, that episode is not there.
And I've also heard that episode was the reason the show got canceled.
Yeah, I heard Bill Burns.
Bill Burns.
Yeah, I've heard him say that.
Crazy. But anyway, the story is that he was working on, he was there doing the initial digging of the tunnels. And he said that the way that they would do it, they would dig 4 vertical tunnels, and that would be like their entrance point to dig out the center part of the base. And they were going down the one of these tunnels straight down into a cavern, and they had a military escort that consisted of Green Berets and other special ops soldiers. But according to Phil Schneider, that none of the people that were there were warned about what was in these caverns. I think the drills kept burning out. Wasn't that what the case was?
Yeah, he said that every time they would try to drill down for these 4 huge corridors, I forget, it was like 4 miles down or something crazy.
Yeah, it was far.
But every time they would drill down, their equipment would break. They would pull it up and it would be destroyed.
Yeah, so they went down the tunnel that they built, or that they were able to get down, and there were these 9-foot tall gray aliens, which, I mean, typically you hear about these little 4-foot tall bastards, and there's fucking giants apparently that live in caverns under the earth. And they didn't take kindly to armed men coming in, so a firefight ensued. According to Phil Schneider, he was able to kill 2 of them before this one waved a hand over its chest and this blue beam shot out, and it took off some of his fingers and blasted a hole in his chest. And according to his story, there was a Green Beret down there with him that put him back on the lift and sent the lift up, saving his life, but that guy died in the process. And he said a total of 66 men were killed that day in a firefight with these aliens.
That's fucking, it's still crazy to hear. And like Mike mentioned, these lecture videos, I hope they're still up on YouTube. There's clips of it in this documentary, but you get to hear him talk about all this stuff. He said that beam that hit him was very similar to electricity. Mike, do you remember him saying that when it hit him, it coursed through his body so hard it blew toes off his feet?
No, not toes, his toenails.
If you watch all those videos, he talks about it and shows his foot. He lost toes that day.
He lost toes as well. I didn't know that. I've heard him say it blew the toenails off his feet. But damn.
Yeah, that shit was crazy to hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 7 9-foot tall grays. That's a little terrifying. I just watched Communion. And they were showing the little grays, the 4-foot tall ones. I don't want to see a 9-foot tall one.
Yeah, and the fact that there were 7 of them, but they took out 66 Green Berets and special unit soldiers.
So seeing his physical injuries, did that freak you out? I mean, you mentioned like when you saw those originally, that was like, whoa. But I mean, these are gross injuries. He's missing, not gross as in nasty, but just like massive injuries. Like he said, he was split open like a fish, and I mean, he literally was forced out of work due to the disabilities he received from his injuries. He was messed up from this thing.
Yeah, the injuries are really what sells his story to me. I feel like if those injuries were done or sustained in a different way, that someone would have came forward to be like, no, there would have been people that were working on him. Those injuries are horrific injuries. So if this were to be like a work-related injury, like say he worked in a factory or something, or like a shooting incident or something, like there would be a record of this happening, and it would be really easy to debunk him. There's been nothing at all that has like contradicted his story. I mean, other than people saying, yeah, right, he wasn't shot by an alien chest beam, but skeptics got a skeptic.
Right.
But I mean, there would be a hospital record at the very least of him going, if it were be work-related injury, there'd be a record of that. There would be witnesses.
Yeah.
I mean, he lost half of his hand, and he's got a hole blown through his chest.
Half his hand, part of his foot, toes, and then the hole in his chest. I mean, that's at least a paper trail of a fucking workman's comp settlement, right?
You'd have to think.
Yeah, there's a part in one of his lecture videos. I've sat through a lot of them. There used to be hours of it because it was a fucking tour, a whole year tour. And
yeah, I'm pretty sure most of that stuff's still on YouTube too.
I hope so. I know his daughter's fighting the good fight and keeping his story alive. But he talks about in one of the videos about people trying to take his life. And he has said that he was recently in a shootout.
One of the lectures he did where he said he was shot at on his way, and he mentions on his way to that lecture, someone had shot at him.
Right. And he mentions that he returned fire. And he said, if I was involved in a shootout yesterday on my way here, shouldn't I be in jail?
Yep.
And he's not. He's just like, shouldn't that be in the newspaper? And he's like, there's witnesses to it. There's people everywhere. It was broad daylight, So doing research, and at the end of this documentary, I guess the people who made it are talking about him. And when you do research, you find out he's like the undebunkable case. Nobody can call bullshit on him because he's got such a unique paper trail. But I mean, like, there's stuff in there I didn't know. Like, I guess, I mean, he's got to be smart to be a fucking structural engineer, but he had an IQ of 167 when he was 16 years old. That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, that is.
So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why he came forward, because that's what interests me the most in Phil's story.
So that whole thing is the only part that to me makes it seem suspicious.
Really?
And there's legitimate reasons for it, but whenever I hear someone come out and they say that they had no memory of this, and all of a sudden the memory just popped in out of nowhere. And I know for him, it came with him getting off this medicine that he had been on for years.
Yeah, well, see, that's something I didn't know about. See, I thought this, and that's the one thing for me that stretched this out, was not so much his reasonings for coming forward, but like my notes, I have hit the recollection. I thought this was something that he experienced and was carrying this knowledge with him his whole life and dealing with his injuries and shit like that, and then is coming forward. And I'll get into why, like he lists some reasons why. I did not know that he had lost memory of this at some point in time. I did not know that his wife they talked to her. And I like the reasoning. It makes sense, right? In this story, if we're going down this rabbit hole, it makes sense. She said that the only medical care he received after this fucking horrible injury from this alien attack was vet provided health care. And they were giving him very poor health care and giving him tons of medications. And we can just say who the fuck knows what they were giving him. But when they got married, she had a good job and they got really good health care. And as soon as they got him off all that shit that he was taking, all these memories started to come back. And that stretched it out for me. You sat there for how many years not knowing why you're missing toes and your hand and there's a giant hole in your chest and you have to use a catheter and you use a wheelchair a lot of the time? I was like, what? Wait a minute. So what was he told why he was like that? Or what was his reasoning or logic of why he was like that? But
that was one thing that I really was curious about that never gets mentioned. Like what was the story that he had for his injuries prior to his memory coming back?
Right.
Like he had to have some memory. Or, or at least an explanation provided.
Absolutely. I did not know that about this case at all. Like, I don't know if that's part of information they're adding because of this director's cut stuff, but they did a lot of talking to his wife. And I have some questions about her too for you, Mike. We'll get back to her. But the reasons that he comes across is, and some of them he states, is that one, the government is keeping truths, furthermore, lying about things that are costing Americans their lives. He's very patriotic, not in a bad type of way. He just didn't think, I mean, like, for him, he was just a fucking scientist going on this job and, got this injury and 66 people died. Another reason is he said over a 20-year period, he had 11 of his friends and colleagues he believed had been killed for their knowledge of secret government operations by what they actually, he said that some of his, well, we'll get into his friend, one of his best friends, but it's murder by suicide, which is such a weird phrase. And that pissed Phil off really bad. But in 1993, 2 years before he started his tour of lectures, his very best friend, an author and fellow ufologist, he was a publisher of like a magazine called, what was it called? Alien Digest?
Yeah, either Alien Digest or Extraterrestrial, something like that.
Yeah, but a guy named Ron Rummel was found shot in the head in the middle of San McClay Park in Oregon. And it was ruled a suicide, but they contested it, and he shows his death certificate. It says officially murder by suicide. But this is obviously people getting killed and having it made it look like they've killed themselves, which we're all familiar with now. I'm not going to say any names, but people driving into trees at 100 miles an hour in residential areas, weird stuff like that. People in their jail cell that have cameras on it that die, and the cameras are happening to be broken that day. But I found it interesting because it wasn't so much money. I'm sure on these lectures he made money, but it was kind of like out of protection, revenge, or payback a little bit. And that's when they killed his friend. That's when he started his tour to get this information out. So it's weird to me, this story. I kind of wanted to know how he got into this stuff, I guess. How did he get into being a geologist and all these things? Because he was obviously interested in this stuff if his best friend was producing this magazine about alien stuff. So it wasn't new to him, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. And I don't know, what the timeline was with when he got his memory back, but I would have to think he had his memory back while he was hanging out with this dude. And that's probably why they, what brought them together.
Well, his wife said something interesting, and this again is all something that he was able to back up with what has been deemed official documentation. His wife and daughter, they let people freely look at this stuff, but he ended up figuring out that they had given him a fake social security number, and that's how they got around a lot of this shit. Mainly so you can't track a person's work history. And he was able to find his original social security number and look it up. And it showed like his first job as a kid at Denny's. And from there, it showed that he worked for all these companies that work with the government for geological reasons and aerospace stuff. So I guess he's just, I don't know. I don't know how you go from being a kid to doing all this stuff, but that was kind of answered for me halfway through when they started talking about his dad. Did you know any of the shit about his dad?
Not before watching the documentary, no, but stuff with his dad gets crazy.
Yeah, and this is another a point for me where I had it's as I read what I have on his dad, I'll go over what I have in my notes as questions for you, and I kind of had to sum up my question, and I laughed at the end of writing it, but his dad was a dude named Oscar Schneider, and unfortunately he was a U-boat captain in Hitler's Navy, and he was a master engineer, a master craftsman, and machinist. And he said that over there, he said that wasn't small time shit. He used the example of saying they give the title of master to somebody who can take a piece of iron out of the earth and turn it into a watch, So, but he ended up being captured during World War II and was absorbed into the U.S. Navy, probably via paperclip.
Probably through paperclip, yeah, I'd have to assume.
Right? That's pretty safe to say. And he ended up working for NATO, and he was there heavily involved himself in black budget projects. So after Phil's dad died, he came across a cache of official government documents that belonged to his dad. And these were very strange documents indeed. One of them, as you mentioned, Mike, was about the Philadelphia experiment, which we're all familiar with. But if you're not, can you kind of summon that up for us, Mike? I don't know why for me, the Philadelphia experiment's always been hard to grasp and retain the information on.
It's such a weird one. And especially how it ties in like with the Montauk project, which is also itself an offshoot of MK Ultra. But the Philadelphia experiment was an experiment that was done to see if they could cloak a ship and make it invisible to not only radar but the human eye. It was using this experimental technology. In the documents we'll be discussing, it was insinuated that this was based off of some sort of device that Nikola Tesla had invented. But while they were trying to prove that they could make a ship invisible, what they ended up doing was teleporting the ship. So it was the USS Eldridge. I believe it went from off the coast of Pennsylvania to Virginia. I really can't. It's been a while since I've looked into it, so it's a little bit foggy. But it moved from one place to another, and when it rematerialized, several of the crew members were like fused with the ship itself, and there were a couple of the crew members that fell off that then kind of jumped through time, and Al Bielek was one of them, who he fell off his story is fucking crazy, and we covered it in detail in the Philadelphia experiment episode. But basically, his story was that he was a soldier or a sailor on board the Eldritch. He fell off into the water, and when he fell off, his consciousness was sent through time, and the consciousness of Al Bielek was put inside an infant who was then raised with no memory until the memory occurred later that he was on the Eldritch and had this whole memory of his consciousness being sent through time and placed within this body of an infant. Crazy story, but he's also Al Bielek is also involved with the Montauk experiment and is part of the group of people that have come out to discuss the Montauk project and how it ties in with MK Ultra. And again, we covered that on the was it the Montauk Chronicles?
Yeah.
Fantastic documentary. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically the Philadelphia experiment. Teleporting ship, people fused within the thing. A lot of people apparently died.
Wasn't there like reports of people that were invisible or like disembodied voices? This is like a complete horror show.
Yeah. And I think like one guy showed up, like he dematerialized and showed up at like a bar or something and got into a bar fight and then just disappeared.
Oh my God. Like
all sorts of crazy shit. But the craziest thing to me was what was from this documentary. So in his father's documents after he died, he had all these things that were written about that. It wasn't ever labeled the Philadelphia experiment, but it was alluded to. And they were talking about some of the autopsies that were done on the sailors and that they had what appeared to be implants in them with what was described as strange writing or hieroglyphs on them. And they didn't know where these implants came from, which to me paints an even more terrifying picture than the Philadelphia experiment already did. Like it to me, it's like fucking Doom all of a sudden. They open this portal and there's these other fucking beings on the other side that implant these people with these weird things. Like where did they go? Like imagine being these people and all of a sudden you're sent to this other plane of existence and these things just implant you with these weird objects and then you get sent back and you die.
Yeah.
Like what were these things that they were implanting? Were they to monitor what, like where they came from? Like, oh shit, these people are from another place. We need to tag them, like in the same way we would tag animals. And they tag us and they send us back, and then we can't handle it and we fucking die.
Yeah, what if it was like tracking and they're trying to follow those people on the way back?
Right, right.
And that's the thing about this document. I mean, these are official documents from the government, and you know, the other documents back this shit up. That's why they say they can't debunk this story. Is his dad, you know, after working with the Navy, he became a doctor with NATO and worked in the aerospace medicine group of the U.S. Navy. And the autopsy was done by him. These were his notes, and they show them in the documentary. He writes that they found these little things that he called that looked like transistors behind their eyes. Other places as well, on the arms and legs, but I mean, you'd have to like remove the eyeball and put that there and put the eyeball back. How's that for a Doom portal world?
Right. Yeah. But we've talked about that sort of thing in these military abduction scenarios.
Yeah.
Where they have the implants after getting abducted and they don't really have, you know, an explanation for what these things are. And a lot of time they're covered up by the doctors. And remember, we covered that one documentary about the doctor that would remove these things for people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of times people would go in and their implants would just disappear. They'd go to the doctor and be like, I know I've got an implant, but they're saying I don't. And that kind of reminded me of when I had my that weird thing in me, and I went to the doctor, and the day before my doctor appointment, it disappeared.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, that was a weird one, dude.
Yeah, it freaked me out. Not to say that I was fucking abducted by aliens. It's just if that's what it made me think of. It freaked me out.
We had just did that episode too, right?
I don't remember how recently, but yeah, it was too close for comfort. It freaked me out.
Yikes.
Especially, I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Yeah, that feels like scar tissue. Did you ever injure yourself there?" I'm like, "Never. Why would I have scar tissue there? That's fucking weird." He's like, "Well, let's get you an ultrasound." Day before my ultrasound, it's fucking gone.
Very weird.
Shenanigans.
Another document that was with his dad's stuff was penned by J. Edgar Hoover himself, stating that all crew involved with the Philadelphia experiment were to undergo psychiatric evaluations. And another thing that he showed that I found very interesting was a picture of his dad in a room. And he said, you can check all the people in the photo. He said they're all the top fields of scientists. And
is that the one with Valiant Thor?
Yeah. And he's got a picture with his dad fucking chilling with Valiant Thor. And I've got to say, I have in my notes, Valiant Thor, what the fuck? I knew the name Valiant Thor. I didn't really look into it until we covered it. I'm going to ask you again, can you tell people what the fuck Valiant Thor is? Because the name Valiant Thor is just so funny to me. But
it is. It's actually Valiant Thor.
Yeah.
Too.
But when you see what Valiant Thor looks like, I mean, when studying for it, you hear about how, just like a lot of the other things, when you see, they talk about the Nordics, right? Like they're normal looking, but there's something that's off, and they're insanely beautiful and symmetrically perfect. This one profile picture that's 80 years old in black and white, I literally wrote, what the fuck? He does not look right. He does not look normal, dude.
His ears, like, look at the ear hole, the way the ear hole is designed.
Yeah,
it's elongated. It's very weird.
He looks like a cartoon superhero, like the huge, like what it would be designed as a perfect looking person. It was it's such a weird picture.
Yeah, and Valiant Thor, I can't remember a whole lot about him, other than he was one of the Nordics that was working very closely with the military in, I believe, the 50s.
Yeah, early 50s. He said the picture was from 53.
Yeah, he was like I guess informant or something. Like he basically worked with the government to kind of debrief on the whole alien phenomenon.
Yeah, so it was his dad. When I saw the Valiant Thor stuff, I was like, holy shit, his dad was into everything. I mean, like, what can you say? Like, you can't call bullshit on anything that his dad papers are saying, because it can all be backed up. Like, they didn't hide
especially that Valiant Thor picture. I've seen that shared by other people before, unrelated to the Phil Schneider thing. And, you know, it's the same person, and that's Phil Schneider's dad.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So do you think that, I mean, I don't know when his dad died. I don't know if it happened when he was a young man, but do you think that could have been the spark of interest in aliens and ufology for him?
Definitely could have been. And maybe that's another memory that was just kind of wiped away.
Right. I definitely think he was probably being drugged. If his medicine was coming from the government, there's most definitely like probably heavy doses of like sodium pentothal or some type of weird shit.
Yeah, not to mention psychedelics and other things like that.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to Phil's tragic ending. In 1996, just 1 year after starting his tour, not being seen for days by his landlord, and the landlord knowing of his health conditions, he alerted the police and asked him to conduct a welfare check on Phil, where he was found face down on his knees with his face in the seat of his wheelchair, dead. Now, we know that Phil, speaking out about people being suicided, so there's a lot of controversy surrounding his death. It's always been very weird, and there's been a lot of back and forth on it, but I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. At first, the responding officer said he had been shot in the face. Secondly, the coroner said that he died from unknown causes. The third cause of death was noted by the mortician who was preparing his body for burial. They found a catheter, his catheter, tied around his neck, which the police coroner completely missed. Now, they show a picture of his catheter off of his neck and
around his neck. Like they,
yeah, warning.
I guess fair warning. They do show pictures of him after he was found, and they're pretty disturbing.
They're pretty rough. As a guy who like grew up on Rotten.com, they're a little bit rough. But that fucking catheter is like only like 6 inches long, dude. So whoever put that around his neck and tied it, it's tied very tight. Like it's so tight they could not find it due to swelling. Like it just wasn't there. But that had to be terrible. It's such a small piece of rubber and it was pulled so tight. And then strangely enough, after his death, the newspaper printed an announcement on their own accord announcing his death and labeling it caused by a stroke.
Yeah, and that's the weirdest thing because officially they were saying it was a suicide, but how the fuck do you do that to yourself, for one? And two, like, usually if you're going to announce, you don't want to announce somebody died of a suicide, you say died unexpectedly. You know, that's typically the way that you kind of mask a suicide. But to say it was a stroke and his family wasn't the one that labeled it a stroke, which is another thing to consider.
Right. And we know he was in poor health and stuff like that, but he didn't wrap a catheter around himself. And in my notes here, I have his room. There's a lot of, like I said, and Mike said as well, fair warning, they show a fucking corpse in this documentary, and they put a warning up too, but I was like, okay, so it's going to be like a black and white blurred out pictures, boom, dead guys, so be warned. But his room was weird to me. There was a lot of blood, not like puddles of blood, but there's a lot of blood everywhere. There was a lot of blood all over his room.
And there was blood coming from his mouth as well.
Mm-hmm.
When they found his body.
Now, his family strongly contests that he wouldn't have been able to do that. He was in really, really bad health. He had to stop working because of his health in 83. So that's how bad a shape he was in. And they say he couldn't have done that. Doctors have looked at his condition and knew of his condition, said he couldn't have done that himself. And I noticed in his room, unfortunately, there's a picture and it shows a pair of prosthetic legs. And they've talked about him being in a wheelchair.
I think, didn't he end up becoming diabetic?
Yes. So, I mean, if the gentleman's missing his legs, do you think he could have done this to himself?
I mean, just the way the catheter was tied so tight around his neck, like that just seems so suspect.
Yeah.
Like and then he was face down in his wheelchair as well.
Yeah. It seems, I mean, that's literally somebody picking him up, turning around, choking him, and dropping him. But that's where poor Phil's story ends. I mean, trying to fight for the knowledge. I mean, you can hear him speak in his stories. He's a very calm, well-mannered, almost monotone guy, very straightforward. But then when he gets to the government lying to the American people about this war that's going on, he says we're at war with these things that are under the ground. He gets pissed. So, I mean, he's really passionate about it. But, I mean, after watching this documentary, which, again, we recommend it, I thought it was very well done. I'm glad something on Phil Schneider has come out in 2022, even though if it's just a director's cut with a little added stuff to it. But with all the revelations, quote revelations, that's going on now about UFOs, UAP bullshit, what does Phil's story mean now?
That's a really good question.
Right? After I watched this, I kind of, somebody at the end of the documentary, somebody, I think there's the folks who made the documentary, they were talking about Phil and how he's can't be debunked because of this official document trail. He kind of compared a story against Bobby Laser there. And somebody stuck up for him. They're like, well, you think Bobby Laser was full of shit? There's a lot of stuff he's been able to prove, or things that just like came true basically. And I don't know, dude. I kind of looked at all these people who are these big time whistleblowers and people who speak out in today's day. A lot of them are right. So where does that put us with a story like Phil Schneider's?
To me, with Phil Schneider, the only, aside from how fantastical his story is, the main thing that I see going against him is the fact that he just suddenly remembered these events. But that being said, the fact that there's no record of his injuries anywhere, no one has been able to produce any documentation that these were done, in some other incident. The fact that he has been very open about that, the fact that his best friend was murdered and framed to make it look like a suicide, and that he had attempts on his own life, compared to, or tied in with the weirdness surrounding the reports after he died, and then the way that he died, I think really supports what he was saying. I don't think that he killed himself in that way. I think the only way that he would have actually killed himself in that way would have been if he was so far gone mentally that he thought this was the only way to prove his story was to kill himself, which I don't see that being the case.
No, with probably hundreds of hours of footage of him on this lecture tour right before this happened. The guy's completely coherent.
Yeah.
There's people, he talks to people afterwards on an individual basis. There's no reports of that guy was rambling or try to touch my butt or anything funky. Yeah, it's such a weird ass case. But just like taking my notes, like I said in the beginning, the spark of interest is where I have more questions. So in summarizing my notes, if I had to say this as quick as I can, I could the story's about a kid who was a genius, who had a dad, who was a Nazi, who was part of Operation Paperclip, who went on to take part in black projects while working with NATO, who went on to become a doctor in the aerospace medicine group of the U.S. Navy, who ended up tending to victims of the Philadelphia experiment, who then himself went on to become a geologist and aerospace dynamic engineer, who joined the military and who was hired to build underground. It just got weirder, and I was like, what the fuck? So I wish we had more clarity. Maybe I got to do some real digging and read all about what type of documents he had. But I didn't, like I said, I didn't know that he had lost the memory of it. I'm always skeptical when new memories come back. But you talked a lot about the military abduction stuff. You talked about memory implants, memory suggestions. Why wouldn't they be able to just delete and wipe out memory? Maybe that's not so far-fetched after all.
That was kind of some of the stuff they were working on with MK Ultra, was to see how they could manipulate the mind. And to me, that seems like you have someone that went through that experience, and he's under the military healthcare plan, so they've got to see military approved doctors. I don't feel like it would be too difficult for them to give him a regimen of supplements that would make him forget.
Absolutely. It could be, like I said, something as simple as just a low dosage of something that they put together that repress memories. It makes sense that once he got off the medication, even if he didn't get super cool medical help after that, it's very interesting that after he stopped taking those, that he was able to get these memory back.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad it wasn't like he got hypnotized at a party with his friends and this scary story came out,
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Yeah. But,
I would hate that so much.
But I had a question about his wife, because she talked about all this. She was a cool lady. She said that he shared all this stuff with her. She saw all this documentation, and he told her everything. And she even mentioned that he was a little bit scared when these memories came back. He was like, I don't want you to think I'm lying or I'm crazy or making this up.
Yeah.
But didn't she kind of come out and after all this fighting and say like, nope, he killed himself. I'm sorry. Have a good day.
Yeah, she did. She's flip-flopped on it a couple of times.
Okay.
And because she was a big supporter, and then after like a few years, she was like, no, that wasn't the case. I think he was just crazy. And then this documentary came out, and she was, if you notice, she wasn't actually interviewed. We heard some voice clips from her, but she wasn't actually
on camera,
interviewed on camera. Yeah. So she apparently, she would have had to have given her consent to have that on there. So she must have come around again, but in her defense, I'm sure she's going through a lot of emotions. I know that they had divorced prior to his death, but, by her own admission, they stayed close even after they had divorced.
Yeah, I heard her mention when she was saying he shared all these documents with her, is that they were already divorced then when he started to talk about this. So
right,
I believe she has since passed. Correct? I
don't know. I'm not sure if she has or not. I can't remember. They didn't mention it on the documentary, and that was put out at the end of 2020. So
who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah, I remember they had a scene with his daughter, and they say that when he died, the city held the samples, his blood samples and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Strangely, they put a hold on it for 3 months. They said they couldn't give it to her or to a hospital for 3 months, which is weird. And then when they went to go get them, they're mysteriously lost. So, I mean, we don't even get test results of the guy's autopsy.
Yeah, just very weird.
Mystery at every corner with this guy's story. And I'll close the show with this. I found something, like I told you, one sentence that made this whole thing weird. And I wanted to talk about it here. And I would say, like in the past hour before we recorded and did the hangout, I started to research what I found. And I found a lot more than I bargained for. So we're just going to do a separate show on it. But coincidentally, the day that Phil Schneider was found dead, a fellow ufologist and researcher and doctor was also found dead.
Really?
Yeah. So that's the story of Phil Schneider. We wanted to do a fresh take on his story and make sure it stayed around if it's difficult to find in our archives, because everybody needs to know about good old Phil fighting the good fight physically and verbally.
Way to go, Phil. Way to go.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.